Alrighty. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started today. Welcome to all of our guests. I'm Leah Garrett. I'm the Vice President for Development and Communications at Community of Hope. And welcome to Conversations of Hope. Today is the second of a three-part series that articulates our bold vision. We've designed the Conversations of Hope to talk about our new strategic plan and some of its most exciting initiatives. Today's session is going to focus on a new program that we have just developed and implemented in this last year to address the unique needs of young families experiencing homelessness. Today's session is sponsored by a valued partner of Community of Hope, Fort Myers Construction, and I look forward to introducing you to one of their representatives for a greeting in just a few minutes. We are delighted to have so many funding partners, donors, volunteers, and friends on today's call. We have about 40 people who have RSVP'd, and I know there's a lot going on in the world today, so for those of you who are all able to be here and giving us your attention, we're just so grateful for that. Many of you have supported us through the past 40 years as we have continued to grow and expand across the district. And many of you have stood by us so solidly during this year that has been a really tough year for our city, for our nation, for the world. So grateful that you are here at this moment to join us. I do want to give you a few notes about today's format. We are in a Zoom webinar format, which means that I and the other panelists and the other guests cannot see your videos as guests. You will remain muted throughout, and we are recording this webinar, and we'll share a link with you in an email that'll come out tomorrow. Today's program includes introductions, an organizational overview from Kelly, our CEO, and conversations with two of our frontline staff leaders on these initiatives. We have designed today's format to be interactive. We'll ask you questions as our audience, and we hope that you will utilize the chat feature there at the bottom of your screen to reply to us. We do also have a session at the end that will be where you can ask questions of us, and for that we will use the Q&A feature of the Zoom. Both of those should be available to you at the bottom of your screen. There's a lot to look forward to in the next hour. Now, I would like to introduce Chris Kearns. He's a valued personal friend of Community of Hope and a representative from today's sponsor, Fort Myers Construction. Welcome, Chris. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be part of this critical conversation about how Community of Hope addresses the unique needs of young parents and their children experiencing homelessness. I've been a volunteer with Community of Hope for 33 years because I specifically wanted to be involved with the dream of eliminating homelessness. I also represent Fort Myers Construction Corporation, and our company has also been pleased to partner with Community of Hope over the past 10 years. Fort Myers is proud of financially supporting this program. We also partner with Community of Hope on job placements. Our employees also volunteer at Community of Hope functions. It's a coincidence that the motto of our company is building the American dream, because we are now united with the dream of eliminating homelessness and helping to pave the way for great futures for the families of Community of Hope. I am pleased to now introduce Kelly Sweeney McShane, who has been the head of Community of Hope for 20 years, also a very good personal friend. She has led Community of Hope through tremendous expansion of programs that assist families in Washington, D.C. by providing housing assistance, affordable health care, and many other activities. She's received numerous awards and is regularly recognized and praised by many organizations and individuals. For example, the Washington Post reported that any Fortune 500 company would love to have her with her resume and record of success. This year, she's leading us boldly, and I will add most effectively through this pandemic. I hope you are as excited as I am to hear from her.
Thank you, Chris. So grateful to Fort Myers Construction for your sponsorship and to you personally for your decades of service to Community of Hope. It's really continues to be such a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you.
So I want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about Community of Hope for those of you who are new to us, as well as our strategic plan and how we're doing on that strategic plan. In January of 2020, Community of Hope launched a new 5-year strategic plan that we spent most of 2019 working on. So who knew there'd be a pandemic thrown in this year? But despite that, we are moving full speed ahead with our strategic initiatives, as well as continuing to focus on our mission, which is more important than ever before. So Community of Hope's mission is to improve health and to end family homelessness to make Washington, D.C. more equitable. As you can see from this map, Community of Hope provides services throughout the district. Our approximately 350 staff work with about 16,000 people. We have 9 locations, which are the red dots on this map, with a 10th in the progress, a new construction we're working on. The purple shading shows where our patients are throughout the city, including along the sort of Georgia Avenue corridor where we grew up 40 years ago, as well as in wards 5, 7, and 8. And then the purple dots show where families lived who've experienced homelessness, where we've helped them move into their own housing and are providing intensive support services, including with young families that we're going to talk about today. And we're also in 3 elementary schools providing school-based mental health services, although at this point that's still virtual. So as you can see, we really are making an impact throughout the city. The way we are trying to work to achieve our mission through our strategic plan is coming up with 4 specific strategic goals. Our first goal, and this visual shows our vision, our mission, and those 4 goals. Our first strategic goal is to improve health and eliminate inequities in health outcomes in under-resourced communities. We've known for a long time that there are huge inequities in health outcomes, and that has only been highlighted even further through COVID and the pandemic. We continue to focus on providing access to medical care, dental care, and behavioral health services, and do it in a way that creates better health outcomes for patients and also really creates trusting and caring relationships between patients and their providers and our staff. For the first 6 months of 2020, we saw just over 8,500 patients and about 24,000 visits. That's a little lower than in 2019, but that's solely due to the impacts of the pandemic when we had to transition quickly to telehealth and are now moving back to bringing in as many people as possible to address things like chronic disease, immunizations, as well as women who are pregnant and providing prenatal care. We have also expanded our COVID testing capacity and are at 2 of our sites 5 afternoons a week for walk-in community testing. We continue to stay focused and pay attention to what's happening with trends in the district right now around COVID and are prepared to address whatever might happen. But along with those continued health focuses, we also pulled out 2 specific areas of focus. The first one is to really expand what we call as emotional wellness supports. We have found that it's incredibly important for people, and especially now during COVID, to have someone just to talk to about being depressed, about being anxious, whatever might be going on in the world, about the impact of trauma and being re-traumatized. And we've seen significant growth and interest in this area, all of which is virtual and through telehealth at this point. The other area of focus is maternal and child health, because we know that there are great disparities in outcomes, particularly in the nation's capital. And so we're doing a lot to expand our very robust set of maternal and child health services, including constructing a new family health and birth center where we have our freestanding birth center, strong prenatal services, medical care, emotional wellness, and plan to add a small pharmacy as well. I encourage you to join us next Friday, where we're going to dig much deeper into those maternal and child infant programs and support services. So along with that first goal, our second goal is to end homelessness for families in Washington, D.C. So what does that mean? For Community of Hope, that means meeting families where they are in each step of the journey. The first step is to helping to prevent families from becoming homeless to begin with. And so that's everything from family mediation to providing financial support, whatever it might do to help families not enter into shelter if at all possible and if they're in a safe situation. We then also provide short-term housing for those who do become homeless, both through our sites in Ward 8 as well as in Ward 1, and then also really focus on helping families move out of that shelter into longer-term permanent housing. And we're going to talk more today about our Young Families Rapid Rehousing Program in particular. In the first 6 months of 2020, Community of Hope served almost 840 families in our housing programs, which represents about 1,600 children. We continue to see families leasing up and moving out of shelter into their own apartments during this pandemic, continue to help people find jobs, and continue to help families stay safe and stably housed. We're continuing to keep an eye as well on if there will be a surge in the future, especially as we look to an end to a housing evictions moratorium and as things continue moving forward. So our third goal is our new one, and that is to innovate, to collaborate, and to better integrate our services in order to support families and communities. And this is where we're trying some new things this year, and really our conversations of hope are focusing on some of those initiatives. One of our new pilots is to better integrate our health services into our housing programs, and that includes having a care coordinator focusing on women who are pregnant and experiencing homelessness, as well as having a therapist embedded in our short-term shelters. Our conversation of hope last week was about that, and that was recorded, so I invite you to listen in when you have a moment for that as well. We're going to talk about our Young Families program in just a minute, which fits under this goal. And then the third initiative under this area is really looking at a place-based community approach to support families and communities. We were pleased to launch the Bellevue Family Success Center at the Conway Health and Resource Center on October 1st, and are looking at ways to better provide information to families and neighbors on the needs they might have, expand our emotional wellness support, and continue to expand services within very targeted communities. Our last and final goal is to be a strong and sustainable organization and make sure we have the people, the resources, and the expertise we need to advance our work. This is where many of you come in. We have an amazing staff, we have a great board of directors, and many supporters who make this work possible, both through their funding as well as their partnership, as well as just working together and advocacy and items throughout the city. And that really becomes the underpinning for the work that we all do. So that's our strategic plan. As you can see, we're moving full speed ahead with our goals and continue to really focus on our mission throughout this time. So today, we're really excited to share with you some of our initiatives around working with young families who are experiencing homelessness. During our strategic planning process, we started thinking about, well, what else do we want to do in our work to end family homelessness? And we immediately zeroed in on the population of families that are of people who are 18 to 24 years old. Both because it's a significant need among families who are experiencing homelessness, is about a third of the general population, but also there's a national conversation about how to best support people in that age group. We also really want to focus on 18 to 24-year-olds with children, because that is our area of expertise, along with families who are experiencing homelessness. So I found once we've named a goal and put it in our strategic plan, we're then able to find the resources to make it happen. And so thanks to funding from the Community Partnerships to Prevent Homelessness, we started what we call our Young Families Rapid Rehousing Program in about March or April of this year, and we are now working with 64 families in that program. So what is rapid rehousing? This is the primary intervention that the district is using to help families move from shelter into their own homes as quickly as possible. Rapid rehousing includes the district paying rent with financial assistance for families, as well as providing case management services. Before COVID, we'd be going into homes on a regular basis, and you'll hear more. Now we're having to do a lot of that work virtually, but really working individually with families to help support their goals. Rapid rehousing tends to be sort of a medium-term intervention, has in the past been 18 months or so. Now it's tended to be 2 years, but continuing, the idea is that at some point, households will be able to move out onto their own. We already serve about 200 families in what we call our Rapid Rehousing for All program, and then we've added this additional new program that's focusing on an additional 64 families. We have historically found that about 90% of the families we work with do not return to homelessness, even a year after leaving the program. So as we move to the conversation today, I just want to emphasize that we are still new in this work and we are still learning. We are committed to evaluating our work and are working with groups such as Measure for Change and the Urban Institute on how to do that in a better way. And we're going to continue to learn throughout this process, and are excited to share with you. So I want to now invite, and we're going to have a conversation with a couple of our wonderful staff who work directly with families and can share some insight about what the needs are of the families that we're working with. And I'd like to invite first Janet Campbell, who is a youth specialist, to join me. Hi, Janet.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So let's just start talking a little bit about why 18 to 24-year-olds are maybe a different population and might have different needs. Can you talk to me a little bit about what's going on in the brain of an 18 to 24-year-old? What's happening with their brain development?
Sure. So Kelly, I've always thought it was interesting that in the United States, we consider an 18-year-old a full-fledged adult. We give them the right to vote. They can sign up for the military if they choose. But research actually shows that the brain is still developing at the age of 18. So I'd like to do a little pop quiz. Don't worry, you didn't have to study, but I'm wondering, can any of our guests take a guess at what age the brain stops developing? If you'd like to take a stab at it, please feel free to drop an answer in the chat box. We will be going over the answers a little bit later. But as you start typing in your answers, I'd like to go over how our brain actually develops. So the last part of our brain that finishes developing in early adulthood is the prefrontal cortex, which is often known as the rational brain. The prefrontal cortex is pretty important. It's responsible for our executive functioning, and it plays a huge role in our decision making, our judgment, and our goal setting. Now, as the prefrontal cortex continues to develop throughout adolescence and early adulthood, it's important that people practice using it. As with any muscle in our body, in order for it to get stronger, it needs to be exercised. However, if someone experiences a trauma through something like chronic homelessness, maybe domestic violence, maybe they've witnessed neighborhood violence, their brain development can actually be altered. The brain might become so focused on survival that it's not able to give the prefrontal cortex the exercise that it needs to grow. Now, thankfully, our brains are plastic, which means that they're constantly changing and evolving. So we can actually encourage the development of the prefrontal cortex through building strong relationships, modeling life skills, and alleviating basic life stressors. So I'm going to take a peek at the chat box, see what guesses we have. We have 22 years old and 30 years old. Both of them are great. Oh, a latecomer, Teresa, with 25 years old, and Cynthia Davis. Okay, well, you guys are actually correct. It is 25 years old. So our brain does not stop developing for 7 years after we are declared legal adults in the United States. And I think that's why the Young Families Rapid Rehousing Program is so important and so exciting, is because it really gives us the opportunity to work with young people at a crucial time in their lives.
Thanks, Janet. And I think that's just really important framing, and along with the context of trauma and what's the impact on trauma on the brain and how we support people who've had those experiences as we move forward. So Janet, you're going to come back, but I'd like in a few minutes, but I'd like to ask Dinahsta Thomas to join us. Dinahsta is our program director for our Young Families Rapid Rehousing Program. So Dinahsta, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon.
So Dinahsta, to help us understand what is happening in the life of a young person, especially as they are experiencing homelessness. And I think you're going to walk us through a guided imagination for that.
I'd love to do that. So I'd like to invite all of us to take a journey, if you will, to imagine. And as you're listening to this scenario, write down, if you so desire, in the comments, anything that comes to mind, any of one of your thoughts or feelings or emotions. Take a journey with me and imagine. Imagine it's late Friday afternoon, just 1 month after your 20th birthday. Today, you're going to pick up the keys to your first apartment. A smile comes across your face as you hear those words in your head. My first apartment. It's a long way from sleeping on your friend's couch. You think to yourself, this is a new start. You meet the property manager in front of the building. You stand there, filled with excitement, nervousness, and wonder. Finally, maybe this will be different. You recall what your case manager told you. She said that she would work with you on things like budgeting, finding a job, and resources for your kid. Boom! A loud noise disrupts your thoughts. Coming from the backside of the building, you hear bomb-like firecrackers. Luckily, your baby can sleep through almost anything and remains asleep in her stroller. The property manager arrives. Hello there, and welcome. You follow the property manager into the building to the 3rd floor, carrying the stroller up 3 flights of stairs with no help from anyone. When you reach the top of the steps, there's a lady standing there with long gray hair. Hi, you must be my new neighbor. Oh, look at the pretty baby. She sleeps through the night, right? Because I don't like a lot of noise. My name is Joanna. Welcome, honey. And she disappeared back into her apartment just as mysteriously as she appeared. The property manager opens the door to the apartment number 302, hands you the key and says, here you go. It should be good. Has a fresh coat of paint. His voice seemed to fade into the walls of this empty space. Wow, you think to yourself, my own place. You begin to imagine where a TV would go and where your baby will play while you make dinner. Then your pleasant imaginations turn just a bit, and you begin to think, where am I going to get a TV, or furniture, a pack and play for my baby? I got another appointment at 4, so the property manager's voice interrupts your internal dialogue. Take a look around and let me know. You take a few steps further into the apartment. You notice something dark and round on the floor in the kitchen. With dread, you think, oh my gosh, is that a mouse? Turning around to get help from the property manager, you see he has already started down the steps. Call the emergency number if you have a problem, he says, as his voice fades down the stairs and out the door. With relief, you find the dark round thing is just a huge dust bunny. Your baby starts to rouse, so you pick her up. She's probably hungry, so you tiptoe into the kitchen to test the stove, making sure you can warm up her bottles. I can handle a dust bunny, you say to your awakening baby as you test the burner on the right side. It doesn't turn on, it just clicks. You test the next one behind it, same thing, all of them, the same thing. The stove doesn't work. You look around and there's not even a microwave. You open the windows to air out the apartment, and the sound of firecrackers in September immediately fill your living room. You call the emergency number the property manager gave you, and it goes straight to voicemail, instructing you to call back on Monday during regular business hours. You would call your child's father, but the last time you spoke, he was a bit angry and made you feel a little bit unsafe. Maybe you could call your older sister, but she lives in Maryland with her husband and 3 kids, and she has a lot on her plate. As you sit on the floor, rocking your now fully awake and hungry baby, you hear your neighbor, Joanna, singing through the walls. You think to yourself, I wonder if Joanna's stove works. What are your thoughts, some of your thoughts or emotions or feelings after kind of hearing that scenario?
I see some comments starting to come in terms of sharing the personal real world view, what luck or no luck. You know, I think for me, and if people want to keep putting in some of their, in the chat, some of their thoughts, is both that excitement component, and I see Amber saying that, and hope, but also, especially as a parent of teenagers, of older 20-year-olds now, that this person is so alone. She had to carry everything up by herself, and doesn't have someone helping. Can you talk a little bit about that social connectedness with family and friends and what's happening with these young adults?
One of the challenges that our young adults face is just what you stated, Kelly, is that they may find themselves not as connected as other young people their age. Many of our young families, the heads of households, their familial relationships may not be that strong for various reasons. Some may be aged out of foster care, and by that alone, there may be some breakdown in their familial relationships. Others, as you heard in the scenario, have family, but they have their own things to concern themselves with and may not feel comfortable burdening them, if you will. Our young families, remember, 18 to 24, this is the time where we are developing our relationships, fostering meaningful, lasting relationships. I can recall personally, the people that are in my inner circle right now are people that I met during this time. They're still getting to figure that out. And another thing, remember, this is their first apartment. It's a new neighborhood. It's not like it's the neighborhood they grew up in and they know Miss Joanna or they know the guy around the corner. So they have to develop these new relationships. And as a result, they find themselves a little disconnected or just lacking in some of those social connections.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I think there's some comments about the feeling of being lonely, which you talked about, as well as that really roller coaster of emotions.
Yes.
I think you talk a little bit about it's a first apartment, how to pay rent, and as well as where's this young person going to get money from to buy a TV? Talk a little bit about what's happening in those situations.
Exactly, most definitely. Our young people are experiencing a joyous time. It's usually their first apartment, and there's always pleasantries around firsts. And then there's challenges around first as well. They're now faced with having to, as you stated, pay a portion of rent or pay something, pay utilities. They're now faced with taking the minimal amount of money that they may have and now stretching it across utilities, transportation, my baby, food. And so budgeting and learning those things is brand new. It's a brand new skill set. They are having to now navigate conversations with other adults. I think if you think about it, often our young people may have been able to talk to another adult and that adult would handle it. Now we are in a position where while we are here to support them as case managers, we are encouraging them, hey, maybe you may want to contact the landlord or the maintenance person about that stove and see if they can come and take care of it. So they're challenged with how to navigate those kind of conversations. It's the first time. And then, quite honestly, being a tenant, right? Being a community member. There are spoken and unspoken rules about being a community member. So now this young person is tasked with not only knowing what those rules and expectations are, but implementing them, acting out on them. And they're learning that. They're not sure about them and may find themselves, challenged in how to obey because they're still figuring those things out. So where do they get money? They're working through job and employment opportunities because they're brand new to the world of work. It's all a brand new experience.
Great. Well, thank you. I think encapsulates so well the situation that young adults are in as they're experiencing this situation. So let's move from there to talk a little bit about, so what is Community of Hope doing? How are we supporting young adults in these households? And we've got one slide that just outlines some of the key components. And again, Dinahsta are going to talk through that a little bit. The first one we've talked about is trusting and caring adults. So talk a little bit about who we hired and what are they doing in terms of working with young families.
Sure. Our case managers and team members are phenomenal. They're excited and passionate about helping people. And just that simple. If you ask any one of them, that's what they want to do, and they're excited about doing such. So our case managers, particularly for our young families, are meeting and speaking with our families on a regular basis, weekly, and sometimes multiple times throughout the week. And that includes things as simple as checking in on them. How are you doing? How are you faring? Particularly with COVID, there's a lot of emotions or a lot of challenges we call it COVID fatigue, if you will. And so our case managers are not only checking in on those planes, but also helping to support our families in reaching goals. They're in our program for a period of time, and many of them have set goals to increase income, to maybe advance their educational pursuits, to learn how to manage some of those things we talked about earlier. Our case managers are providing that one-on-one on a regular basis. Another thing that you may notice, it says here, the ratio of the case manager to our families is literally 1 to 15, one case manager to about 15 families. That's very intentional. So to provide time and energy and resources to our families, and they're not pulled in 100,000 directions, but they can afford that time to that family in a special way, where they may need a little bit more time, maybe a little bit more hand holding, maybe a little bit more walking them through a process. And that affords that case manager the ability to do just that.
And that trusting and caring relationship is so important. So as their case managers developing relationships with young families, talk about what is happening intentionally around creating more connections, social connections that we just talked about, where families are feeling so alone, as well as some of those life skills that young adults need to practice and develop.
Most definitely. One of the things, very simplistically, that our case managers are doing just in their interactions and times with the families, when situations arise, and they do arise, where a family may need something or some place. One of the things we are often encouraging is talking with our families about who's in your circle, who's in your circle, if you will, who's on your team, who else can we call, or maybe you can contact and say, hey, I may need a little help here, can you help me? And that's conversation, very simplistically, but that's a conversation which helps the client to begin to think about just that. Who's on my team? Who can I speak to? We began to help them craft conversations. Again, having adult conversations with other adults. That's something new for them. That's one thing. Another thing that we're planning is to partner with other organizations in our community that may offer different type of services, whether it's a mentorship type of service where we can possibly connect our families, those who may be interested, and other either organizations or individuals that can provide direction or insight on topics of interest. So we're working on connecting and providing opportunities in that way that will now expose our families to new people, right? To other resources outside of ourselves. And even the basic part of case management that does involve making referrals to other services, again, very simplistically, but intentionally connecting our families to other resources, whether it's a resource around mental health services, or resource around education, or whatever the different resources, helping them navigate that conversation and make connections outside of us, so that when they have moved on to their to the next level in their life, they will have access to resources that they may not have had access to before.
Well, and Dinahsta, you talked about moving on to the next step, because we know rapid rehousing is a medium-term financial assistance. Talk about what we are doing in terms of that employment and education, as well as some of the financial support to remove barriers. How are we helping in those situations?
Certainly. I'm very proud of our employment and education specialists. We have 2 on our team, and we are able to link any one of our families with an employment specialist who's interested in securing employment or increasing income, because maybe they're employed, but they may want something additional, or they want to pursue educational or vocational goals. Our employment and education specialists are there to assist in that process. And one of the things that they're doing is literally very client-centered, very personal to each client that they're working with, kind of mapping a plan to help them reach their goals. There are often barriers to these things, however. For example, I had a client who wanted to pursue their a certification as becoming a officer, a security officer, but needed identification. I needed an ID card, didn't have it, had some barriers around tickets or something like that. We were able to not only walk the client through the process of making an appointment and things of that nature to get that new identification card, but kind of mitigated that barrier by helping to pay for the ID and supporting them and other things so that they can move forward in that goal. And so we have extra finances, or we would have liked to apply finances to help mitigate some of those barriers so that they can move forward in reaching their goals, high school diploma, GED, vocational services, anything of that nature. We are working with them very individualized to meet those goals.
Yeah, because sometimes $25, $100 can overcome barriers in amazing ways, and we're making sure that that's available. So thank you, Dinahsta. The last part we want to work on in terms of interventions is extra support for the needs of the children. So I'm going to ask Janet to join us to talk a little bit more about that part of the intervention in particular. So Janet, you are a youth specialist. Can you tell us what is a youth specialist and what do you do?
Yes, so the role of the youth specialist is to really support the children that are in our housing programs. We know that homelessness impacts the entire family, which of course includes children. So while the housing case managers assist the heads of household in accomplishing their goals, the youth specialist is really focused on stabilizing the children. So I typically work with children on developing social emotional skills, and increasing academic outcomes. But of course, our world is really different right now in the pandemic. So my primary focus has been supporting families as they navigate the wild world of virtual learning.
So talk to us about that wild world. What does it look like? How's it impacting children? What are we doing?
So virtual learning has been a challenge for our families, just as it's been a challenge for families across the United States. There is a digital divide in our city, which has become even more evident when we started virtual learning this past spring. In fact, just prior to the pandemic, there was actually a survey done which found that less than half of the households across the river in Ward 7 and Ward 8 had access to the internet. Now, although this school year, DCPS has provided its students with laptops and hotspots, many of our clients have continued to report having spotty or inconsistent internet access, since hotspots just aren't nearly as effective as broadband internet. In addition to having inconsistent internet service, many parents have reported that their children are just having trouble focusing while they're in their home. No child is meant to stare at a screen all day, and elementary age children in particular have a really hard time engaging in virtual learning for 5, 6, 7 hours every day. And just as children are kind of having some problems communicating with their teachers over the computers, our parents, of course, have a lot of anxiety. We know that virtual learning is not nearly as effective as in-person learning. And so many of our parents are really concerned that their children might be falling behind in school. All of that being said, of course, we've all been keeping an eye on the COVID cases. And as they're kind of starting to rise back up, a lot of our parents are also reluctant to send their kids back to school. So our families are really trying to navigate a difficult situation right now. And the role of the youth specialist is to try to eliminate as many roadblocks as possible. So I communicate frequently with school staff to make sure that the youth on my caseload are engaged in virtual learning. So if I find out that a student isn't logging on to school every day, I can check in with the family and say, hey, is there a problem with technology? Are you experiencing issues with your hotspot? Or maybe does your child just have Zoom fatigue and they're lacking some motivation? And from there, we can try to problem solve as much as possible. We've also been really fortunate to have some funds available from the Day One grant and the Back to School Bash that lets us give our students school supplies, things like whiteboards and whiteboard markers that are a little bit more fun to write on versus your regular pen and paper. We've also been able to provide some older students with bigger ticket items like a desk or a desk chair so that they can find a private space to learn. Lastly, but probably just as important, the role of the youth specialist is to really try to be a source of support for our parents. Of course, virtual learning is incredibly frustrating and the pandemic is really scary. So we just want to be a safe place where parents feel like they can vent and kind of get a load off their shoulders for a second.
Yeah, so very important. Can you talk a little bit about some child or family you've worked with where you feel like you've really made an impact with all of this support?
Yeah. So I have a client who's 11 years old. He is in the 5th grade at a school in Southeast Washington, D.C. Now, earlier in his life, he has experienced some significant trauma, which has really made it difficult for him to manage some of his emotions. But he absolutely loves going to school, loves his teachers. He's passionate about learning. His family is one of the families that I referenced earlier that did not have access to the internet. So his school did provide him with a hotspot. However, we know that in a lot of neighborhoods that have poor cell signal, the signal for the hotspots can also be pretty spotty. So when his online classes freeze or sometimes he gets kicked out of the meeting, he gets really, really frustrated. Like I said earlier, he loves school and he loves learning. And when he can't calm down, often what he will do is just shut that laptop, head out the door. He decides he's done for the day. So what I've been doing with the family is first, I have weekly check-ins with both my child and his mother, and then the teacher. And what I've been doing is really trying to motivate him to at least try to get on to the internet. So he has an incentive going actually next week. He has the opportunity to earn a small McDonald's gift card. And once again, I'm just monitoring every day. Did you at least just put forth that effort? Now, at the same time, I'm really trying to teach him to manage his frustrations in a healthy way. So we've also been working on a calm down box that he keeps in his bedroom. And the calm down box is full of items that hopefully remind him to try to take a deep breath and self-soothe. So we have things like a stress ball that he can squeeze when he's really mad. We have a little pinwheel that he can practice blowing on to take deep breaths. And so I've really been encouraging him, if you experience internet difficulties, yes, that's frustrating. I would get frustrated too. But instead of closing that laptop, can we just try to use some of those items to calm down? So like we touched on earlier, normally I would be having a lot of face-to-face contact with him. I would be going into his school to help out. Of course, none of that is possible during the pandemic, but we have been able to adapt some of our interventions to hopefully improve the virtual learning process as much as possible.
Thanks, Janet. I definitely need a calm down box and one of those pinwheels myself. So thanks for all your work. Dinahsta, if you could join back on, and we'll get to questions in just a second. I know we've got at least one there. Dinahsta, if you would like to share a story with us as well as about a family that you're working with where you feel like you're having an impact.
Certainly. I was reminded of a story, if you will, of one of our young family heads of households. He came to us with certification in phlebotomy, but didn't have employment and had been searching and searching on her own, kind of wanted to do it herself, but not to much avail. And so encouraged her to just consider working with one of our employment specialists, and she acquiesced eventually. And one of our employment specialists was able to take a gander at her resume. Again, she has a wonderful foundation for a great career, but didn't really have a resume that represented that. So she was able to work with her on her resume, being able to help her to shine and put forth her skills and her experiences in a way that made her look good. And within 3 weeks, not only did she have an interview, but she had a job in her career, in her desired area. So just a small example, but great example of how we believe our efforts are making a difference.
Great, thank you. Excellent, excellent example. So I think we're going to move to questions at this point, and we do have a few, and Leah, you're going to take us through them.
Thank you. First of all, before we go to questions, and I just remind everybody, drop your questions in the Q&A. If you can't find the Q&A, it's okay to drop them in the chat. Be happy to answer those in just a moment here. But thank you very much to Kelly, to Dinahsta, to Janet for sharing your expertise, for sharing your heart with us today. You've done an excellent job, so we're so excited. We do have a question in here about whether or not we're able to support clients with transportation. And Dinahsta, I think that would be a great question for you. Would you be able to address that?
Yes, most definitely. We do help our clients with transportation. Oftentimes, whether it's employment related or school related, that could be a barrier for many of our clients. Particularly with COVID, our clients are very skeptical about taking public transportation. And they may have, children, little ones, and things to carry, and just a lot of things to concern themselves with. So we have been able to assist, whether it was public transportation or also Uber gift cards for transportation, and that way, making sure that, again, if that is an obstruction to them reaching some specific goal or getting what they need, we are definitely here to support that.
That's excellent. I'm so glad that we're able to do that. I know myself, the organization benefits from a giving campaign that usually happens every spring called the Big Green Commute, that's done by a bunch of architectural firms, including ZGF, a good friend of ours, that provides some of those funds to get people to where they need to go. So lots of people make that possible. We'll implement that. Thank you. Jane Thompson has a question for us. I'm going to have Kelly to answer this one about how clients are referred to our programs. How do they come to us? And that's such an important question with a big answer. So we're going to leave that one for Kelly.
Right. So the way in the district, if there's a family who's experiencing homelessness, they have to go to one central intake location, which is called the Virginia Williams Resource Center. And that intake, Virginia Williams Resource Center, then assesses whether a family is eligible for homeless services or not. If they have less than a day where they can stay stably housed, they get referred to prevention. Prevention does the work they can to try to prevent homelessness and then moves on from there. So even in our rapid rehousing programs, we have a certain amount of slots, so to speak, and we are assigned families through that centralized intake system, through the community partnership to end homelessness. So it's sort of, and this is, a different conversation about like how we better integrate our services. It kind of depends on what space do we have available on any given day. The difference with the Young Families Rapid Rehousing Program is we have asked for young families who are 18 to 24 years old versus our sort of regular rapid rehousing for all will be any age group, any combination of families can be referred.
Thank you very much. So we have another question that has just come in as well. And this, Kelly, is a good follow-up to what you've just stated, if you don't mind handling that. Do the people have to be DC residents? What if they don't have an ID or way to track that? That's a great question.
Yes, and the centralized intake, part of the screening is that they are DC residents. And there's different things that they look at to document that, whether it's residency or a history. I'm not totally clear if they have to have ID. I do know that our programs, and Dinahsta, you probably comment on this, can help people get ID yes. and birth certificates and all the materials that they need. But there is a component around DC residents for the DC programs.
Certainly. We definitely assist with identification, acquisition. It can be a challenge for many, whether it was lost or they just didn't have it before. When they come into, when we are assigned, rather, often included are maybe vital records and inclusive of an ID, but if it's not present, we can start that process with them to help them apply for it. And again, if needed, pay for that fee so that they can kind of, again, not have that and have to worry about that in the future.
Great. Okay, great. I have a question here that's come in as well anonymously, just about if we have anything that we could name, and I want to ask Janet first and then Dinahsta on this, as a clear barrier to us being able to support the families in the way that we want to the most. What would that be?
Yes, this is a short-term answer, but I'm going to say COVID. it has been, you know, a tough adjustment, especially for my focus working with kids. Like I said earlier, kids do not enjoy sitting in front of a screen all day. Connecting with them virtually is not the way to get the best results. So for me, I'm really missing those in-person connections. I talk with all the youth on my phone, all the youth on my caseload once a week on the phone, but it's just not quite the same. So I'm eager to return to our pre-pandemic world, get back to the real good work.
Yeah, that's definitely a good answer, because it certainly is a barrier. I would say one of the barriers that I have noted is it is a short-term program.
Mhm.
And so immediately I'm in the mindset of how can we support as much as possible, as quickly as possible. But we talked a little bit about trauma. We talked a little bit about just development and those and the newness of everything, personal things that they're going through. And all those things take time to work through. And sometimes you see the potential and you see those barriers at play, the developmental processes, and it just takes time. And I know that we have a limited amount of time, and sometimes I feel a little of a barrier there that may feel like it's hindering some of the things that we want to accomplish.
Time is of the essence, and families are coming through some really big hurdles as they enter the program. We certainly hear that and experience that. We wish you the very best in the work that you're able to do for those months. Another question, and hopefully you all don't mind answering this one as well, is just what fuels you in your work? What's keeping you excited about coming in on Monday?
Go ahead, Janet.
So I will say 100% for me, it's just working with kids. Kids are, you know, that's my dream team there. I love working with youth. And I think specifically what's so exciting about Community of Hope is that there is this focus on children and on youth. I think, you know, typically maybe with other homeless providers, there's a lot of focus on the heads of households, and Community of Hope is so unique in that we're not just working with the adult, we're really surrounding the entire family with support. So that is just, for me, the absolute best. It's hard not to get excited when you work with kids, you know?
Definitely. They are so adorable. I love it. I love it. When I hear them on the phone, we're not visiting, so it's hard. But I hear them on the phone and I'm already distracted when I hear the children. One of the things that fuels me is actually the small but significant strides that I see being made. It's a challenge, like I just mentioned earlier, a short amount of time, a lot of things to unpack, and those challenges are there. But when you see the small but significant strides, the moment where the young person gets a job in the area of their interest, the moment where this client for the first time was able to speak without with the ability to regulate their emotion, and we can have adult conversations. It's a stride of success. The moment when they realize, oh, this is how you do a resume. Okay, I'm proud of my resume. It's the small but significant moments that keep me coming, because I know if you continue to work, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step type of thing, and so that keeps me coming back.
And I feel like from my perch in the organization, I live vicariously through those small moments that you all share with us, and even the ones that you shared today about the client who was able to achieve what she had hoped for. It's so encouraging. Not every story has to be this huge success story. Not every story will end with homeownership, but they end with significant achievements that are setting up our families for future success. So I'm so proud of the work that you are all doing. It looks like that's a wrap on our questions for today. I would love for our participants to just do a little shake of your hands to say thank you to our panelists. Thank you again to Chris Kearns and Fort Myer Construction. We're so glad to have you a part of this today and a part of our work on every day. Thank you, Chris. I'll just wrap up with a couple of other ways to get involved and stay involved. So really, really grateful for this moment together. So we want to encourage you that if you are thinking about making donations to your favorite charities at the end of 2020 or early in 2021, that you would keep Community of Hope at the forefront. Your giving really creates these innovative moments and programs where we can really see things achieved for the people that we serve. We do accept gifts of stuff. You saw the picture of that empty apartment. You remember what your own first home or first apartment looks like. We do accept gifts of household items. We have a list on our website for families with young children. We do accept gifts of mother and baby supplies to set them up well for success. Again, all of that's available on our website. One of the things that we're doing towards the end of the year is ensuring that every family in our program receives a retail gift card of about $50. It's our holiday cheer campaign. We would love to invite your support with that. We have a big goal of over $30,000 to achieve for our families. So please join us in that. Again, information available on our website. And then we are always welcoming volunteers. We have a lot of other volunteer opportunities that will arise when COVID is over or will be revived at that time. But in the meantime, we have mentoring for children in our programs. Many of the children that Janet works with receive the benefits of a mentor, so that's something you can do. We're also just rolling out a new volunteer opportunity of college readiness to support both the youth and heads of household who are looking to go back to college, and supporting them in their application process and guiding them through all of that. So those are just a couple of the ways to stay involved. Again, thank you. Thank you for spending this last hour with us. We hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday. And we will see you hopefully next week for our final conversation of hope around our Healthy Moms and Healthy Babies program. See you then.